Welcome to our In Focus discussion tonight. Today, the U.S. Census Bureau released a lot of data that states will use to redraw districts around the country. This is a process that happens every 10 years, and due to the pandemic, states are under an extremely compressed timeline compared to past years. But after today, a lot of the hard work really gets underway. So we wanted to check in with those who are in charge of the process. Kicking off our conversation are Dr. Rex Facer, chair of the Independent Redistricting Commission, and via Zoom, Senator Scott Sandall of Tremonton and co-chair of the Legislative Redistricting Committee. Thank you both for joining us tonight. In this first segment, we will focus on the census data. Senator Sandall, we'll start with you. Aside from redistricting, what do the census numbers really mean for our state?
The census numbers are really very important. Much of the federal dollars that are appropriated out to the states are based on census data. So when federal government partners with social services, those kind of things, it's based on our every 10-year census data. In addition to that, a lot of state statute is directed around census data as far as partner sharing with cities and counties, grants. In state statute, we also identify each county by class according to how many people live in that county, and that changes every 10 years according to census data, and the state does a lot with those classifications of counties based on this census data. So it's something that affects all of us each and every day through the whole 10-year period, besides dividing us up in who we vote for.
Yeah, and that's why it's so important for everyone in the country to participate in this census survey every 10 years. Dr. Facer, Utah was the fastest growing state in the nation. This is baffling and almost like it's surprising to me. What can we make of that? And do they point to more children or more people moving to Utah?
Well, Utah is an interesting place. We have one of the highest birth rates in the country, but yet our birth rate has been declining. And so part of our growth has been that increase in population from what we call natural growth, but part of it has been the in-migration that we've been seeing. And this really creates a different dynamic as people move to different parts of the state, and that's one of the things that we'll really be looking at over the next several weeks.
I think the secret is out. Everybody is learning how cool Utah is. Senator Sandall, what parts of the data have you seen that jumps out at you, or what is the most interesting to you?
Well, the data that was released today is in an interesting format. We haven't had time exactly to boil down to the census block level and put those pieces of the puzzle together. But initially, some of the things that we've seen that are reported, we are becoming a more diverse state. I believe we all understand that. We know that. We see areas of really high population growth compared to the other parts of the state. And I'm not sure that they were too unexpected. I will say that the data that came today came in about 7,100 lines that represent each individual block of community, basically your neighborhood. And the experts are trying to build those Lego blocks together to create how that fits together in the state of Utah. And you can imagine what a complex process that is. And I'm sure that other things will jump out at us as we see more of those Lego blocks get put together.
Dr. Facer, what about you? What jumped out to you the most with the data that you've seen so far?
Well, I think a couple of things that really jumped out at me when I looked at the growth patterns across the counties. We had 7 counties in Utah that actually lost population. We had 6 that had population growth over 20%. And then the rest of them were somewhere in between that relatively small growth to just under 20%. And that rapid growth that we're seeing really creates some interesting dynamics and some challenges as we seek to provide services to people across the state.
I'm wondering, could you share some of those counties that either lost growth or saw growth? I'm wondering, is it the urban areas that saw growth and the rural areas that lost growth?
Sure. A couple of the counties that saw very high growth, Utah County, Washington County, Morgan County, among some others. But those were places where it's not surprising to any of us, as Senator Sandall said, that those were places that saw high growth. We've all kind of seen that with all the building and development that's been going on. But then we saw some of the places out in rural Utah, ranging from Daggett County to some of the other interior counties that lost population.
Thank you for that. Senator Sandall, what are you going to do now with the data in order to help you in your processes for redistricting?
Yeah, we have a couple of good tasks, big tasks ahead of us. One is the compilation of the data over the next couple of weeks to try to get down to begin to build maps around this data. We also, beginning in September, are going to travel around the state and get public input in a personal way across the state, and we're looking forward to that process. But until we get the product or the data loaded into a computer system that helps us to draw the lines and the maps, well, we're still just analyzing data, and we'll see more things that jump out at us as we get to analyze more and more of that, what we call the census block data. Very interesting process.
And Dr. Facer, what about you? How are you going to be using this data in your processes?
Well, in much the same way that Senator Sandall has said, the first major task is getting that data into the mapping software in a way that can be used. And just as Senator Sandall said, we've got folks working on that right now, trying to get that data so that we can start drawing maps. That's really our next task moving forward, is using the data to draw some maps.
Dr. Facer and Senator Sandall, hold that thought. We have to take a quick commercial break, but when we return, we'll resume our In Focus discussion on census data and redistricting. Thanks for staying with us for our second In Focus discussion tonight on census data and redistricting. Before the break, we were joined live in studio by Dr. Rex Facer, chair of the Independent Redistricting Commission, and via Zoom, Senator Scott Sandall of Tremonton and co-chair of the Legislative Redistricting Committee. Now we shift gears in our conversation to talk about the redistricting process. This time we will start with you, Dr. Facer. Can you tell us about the role the Independent Redistricting Commission has in this process?
Sure. In 2018, the voters approved Initiative 4, which created the Independent Redistricting Commission to create a set of maps that would eventually be delivered to the legislature, and the legislature will then use those in its deliberations on choosing what map to use. Our job really is to try and represent the interests of the people of Utah and their perspective, using a broad set of criteria to create maps that will represent the people.
And Dr. Facer, could you also give us an idea of who makes up the commission? Which individuals are part of this team? Sure.
It's a 7-member commission. We have 3 members that were appointed by the Republican leadership in the House and Senate. We have former Congressman Rob Bishop, former Senator Lyle Hilliard, and then an independent member of the commission, Jeff Baker, who's a GIS specialist. Then the Democrats appointed former Chief Justice Christine Durham, former Senator Karen Hale, and an independent former Judge William Thorne. And then the governor appointed me as the chair.
Good memory there. Senator Sandall, ultimately it is your committee that will make the final redistricting decisions. How are you and your team going to be using the recommendations from the independent committee?
Yes, the legislature is by state constitution tasked with drawing the lines and approving those lines. So our committee actually will take input from the public. We'll take the input from the Independent Redistricting Commission, and then our committee will boil that information down and propose to the entire legislative body maps that then will be debated and voted upon sometime in November in a special session. But our role as a committee is to do the groundwork. It's to get out amongst the people and combine as many voices as we can. And we're looking forward to the Independent Redistricting Commission covering some of that ground in different spaces and different locations that we won't go to and can't get to, and looking forward to combining that effort and then as a legislature being able to debate and process all that we've found across the state.
Let's get into a little bit more about public input. Dr. Facer, could you tell us a little bit more about the public input for each of your processes? I'm thinking, how long typically is this period? How do you go about, do you hold meetings? Do you accept messages, emails? Give us a little bit more insight on exactly how the public gets involved.
Sure, it's a little bit of all of that. We've been, for the last month or so, we've been out at community events, city festivals, fairs, other kinds of things, trying to gather input from the public. At the beginning of September, we'll start a series of 13 public hearings that we'll hold around the state that Senator Sandall referred to. But in addition to that, people can always go to our website, uirc.utah.gov, and send us an email message through there, or they can send it through our uirc@utah.gov comments website or email address. And we really are seeking to get as much input from the public as we possibly can, because the more input we get, the better information we can then pass on to the legislature to help them make useful decisions around the maps that will be presented to them.
Right, and ideally we want that public input to be very representative of how diverse Utah's population really is. Senator Sandall, some people have not been involved in the public input process. For those that may be listening and maybe haven't gotten involved, haven't chimed in, what would you say to help them understand why it is important for them to be involved in this process?
Just as we would encourage everyone to be civically involved, this is something that will affect a lot of decisions that are made in your community over time, and we want that public input. We have contracted both with the Independent Commission and the state legislature with a company called Esri that will have a interactive mapping tool available for the public. You can access that map sometime in the first week of September when all this data gets into their system through redistrict.utah.gov, and we will see those maps as a legislature. We are on kind of a parallel course with the Independent Redistricting Commission. We will do outreach meetings as well, and we will have an interactive tool. People can get on there. There's a tutorial. Esri's very good at what they do, and we are very impressed with the ability that people will have to draw a map top to bottom, corner to corner in the state for each of the four things: congressional, state Senate, state House, and state school board maps. And we welcome that hands-on input back into the process.
Thank you, Senator. Dr. Facer, what is the timeline from here?
So the timeline, as Senator Sandall says, ultimately they have to make a decision by the middle to the end of November. We have an obligation to have delivered to them the maps from the Independent Redistricting Commission by the 1st of November. And so we'll have our public hearings and our map drawing between now and then we'll deliver a report to them. They'll hold some hearings, and then the legislature will take the maps that we present them and the other maps that they have presented by the public and others, and then have their deliberations. And ultimately, we'll get a set of maps that will guide us for the next 10 years.
That deadline is coming up. All right, Dr. Facer and Senator Sandall, hold that thought. We have to take another commercial break, but when we return, we'll resume our In Focus discussion on census data and redistricting. Welcome to our third and final In Focus discussion tonight on census data and redistricting. We pick up now with Dr. Rex Facer and Senator Scott Sandall. In this segment, let's talk about the goals of your groups, and we'll start with you, Senator Sandall. Population is the most important factor in redistricting. All districts need to be roughly the same size. What do you think is the next important factor for us to consider?
I think our committee has made it clear that we want to make sure that we have contiguous districts. We want to be as compact as possible. And then I think that we will start to consider the political subdivision lines, cities, counties, where those lines draw. It will be impossible to divide everything along those lines. We just know that, because you can't get the population the same and align all counties and cities. So we have to cross some of those, but those are the top three, I believe, that we'll look at.
Dr. Facer, anything that you would like to add about that?
Well, first, we're going to pay attention to the very same things that Senator Sandall and his colleagues will be paying attention to: contiguity, compactness, and those kinds of things. We then have a whole additional set of criteria that the statute lays out for us that we have to pay attention to, including, as Senator Sandall said, looking at political boundaries, cities and county boundaries. But we're also looking at things such as communities of interest, trying to understand where it is that people see themselves in a community, and trying to draw lines that keep people together where possible, that have similar interests, whether that's social, economic interest or other demographic kinds of interest. But also looking at things like natural borders and boundaries, rivers, highways, those kinds of things. So it's a whole complex set of things that we'll have to be balancing as we try and sort through beyond population, and having equal population, which is, of course, the first and foremost criteria for all of us.
It's a lot of information to ingest, sort out, and then execute. Dr. Facer, when this happened 10 years ago, there was the idea of a donut versus a pie when considering the 4th National Congressional seat. How do you, and then we'll talk to Senator Sandall about this, how do you think about dividing the state for representation of the whole population?
Well, it's an interesting question, and partly it becomes a little more challenging because of the shifts of population that we've seen. Utah County has grown more rapidly, for example, than has Salt Lake County, and so we're going to have to see a shift down towards Utah County, and that's going to cause us to have to think carefully about whether it makes sense to have whether you want to call it a donut or a slice of pie. We're just going to have to be paying attention to how we get the most compact and contiguous areas, while taking into account the interests of people across the state, ranging from rural Utahns to the urban and suburban Utahns, to make sure that we're trying to represent their interests in as clear a way as we possibly can.
Senator Sandall, anything you would like to add to that?
I think really Dr. Facer was spot on that the data is going to have to drive a great deal of this discussion. We just simply won't know until we combine all those Lego pieces of the census block of which way we will probably go in dividing up those congressional districts. We'll be better tuned into that probably in 3 to 4 weeks.
Dr. Facer, you are also dividing up districts for the state legislatures. How are you considering that division, and do you expect many changes?
Well, again, with the shifts that we've seen in population, there are going to have to be some changes. And it's the data that's going to drive those changes, and we're going to try and make the most sense that we can out of the way that data lends itself. And so if we can keep communities whole, that's something we're interested in trying to do. If we can keep communities of interest together, that's something we're interested to do. But at the end of the day, we have an obligation to make sure that every person in Utah has equal representation, and it's that principle that's going to drive the first and foremost criteria of sorting out these legislative Senate and House districts, as well as the state school board.
Senator Sandall, we have time for final words. What would you like to leave our viewers with? Mainly, what would your responses be to critics or those who are concerned about this process?
My last word would be, please get involved. Find out when someone is meeting in your community and come and present that to us. Meet with us. Also, take the time, if it's very interesting to you, to get online and begin to draw maps to submit them. There's spots in our programming where you can make notes and send notes to us why you drew lines at a certain area or a certain way, what your interest was in drawing the line that way. And we are really just looking for public input, as much public input as we get. So we appreciate you helping us elevate this to a level where more people will be interested.
And what would you say to those who maybe are criticizing or concerned about this process?
I will say that in this process, I think it's pretty clear that the only person that will be happy about a map that is drawn is the one who drew it. Everyone else will criticize for some reason because it will be different from what they had in their view. As a legislature, our job is to try to balance as many interests as we can, understanding that there will always be those that will be critical of the work that we do.
And Dr. Facer, we have time for your final words as well. What would you like to leave our viewers with?
First, I'd like to echo Senator Sandall's comments that we want the public to be involved. We want them to be engaged, both in the redistricting committees, hearings, as well as the independent redistricting commission's hearings. Please come out. Please go to our websites. Please submit maps, as Senator Sandall has mentioned. All of that input is going to help us make better decisions and have more information. And more information is going to lead to better public engagement. And the public can then hold us all accountable on how we use that information that they're presenting us with. And that's what we want. We want a public that feels that they've been heard, and we want to then present high quality information to the legislature that they can then use in productive ways to serve the state of Utah for the next 10 years.
You've been hearing from Dr. Rex Facer, Chair of the Independent Redistricting Commission, and Senator Scott Sandall, Co-Chair of the Legislative Redistricting Committee. Thank you both for being our show tonight. We appreciate your time.
Our pleasure.
Thank you, Rosie.
Thank you.
And don't forget, we'd love to hear from you about the show. We invite you to join our Facebook group by searching for ABC4 In Focus, or you can send us an email, infocus@abc4.com.